Greetings, YouTube. I find myself watching some Marvel clips the other day from some of their Netflix TV shows. Oh, and by the way, that's not a cat on that shelf back there. It's the battery charger for my cordless drill. Um, and I was watching I guess the ultimate fight between Daredevil and Fisk, Kingpin, and they're fairly well suited to each other physically when it comes to a head-to-head. They're neither of them has any physical superpowers. They're just superbly trained. And one's technically Fisk is trained in sumo, that you really can't tell in that fight, and Daredevil is trained in some kind of jujitsu, whatever Marvel version thereof. Um, Daredevil's superpowers are his senses and things like that, which could give him an edge in combat. I'm not positive. Um, and I also was watching some clips from Luke Cage, who is a real life superhero. He also has some encounters with Jessica Jones. I'm not really sure what her power set is other than being strong and tough. I don't think she's on the same power level as Luke Cage. Now, I've always liked Luke Cage's power set. I thought it was a good medium tier power set. He's strong, he's tough, he's bulletproof. He's not invulnerable, but he's very durable, and he's a solid character for defending his domain. Just like Daredevil's pretty good at defending his neighborhood, Power Man or Luke Cage defends his area, which is slightly larger because he's a little more powerful. He's a true meta-human. And I was suddenly struck by the fact that, isn't it convenient that heroes are always thrown up against villains that are about the same power level, more or less? It's like the way when you're playing a video game, your character who's first level is wandering around a zone with lots of first and second level encounters, and the bosses are third and fourth level. And when you finally beat them, you move out of that zone, and the next zone has tougher people. It's very convenient that way, isn't it? It's always struck me as weird is why don't the tougher people just move into the lower level place and completely take it over in an afternoon? But they don't. I wonder why. And then it occurred to me while watching these two different characters, Luke Cage and Daredevil, that if Daredevil were up to go up against Kingpin, Fisk, how long do you think that fight would have lasted? If Fisk attacked Luke Cage, what would have happened? He would have broken his bones and been incapacitated, if not killed, in seconds. But that's not what happens. Now, all of this led me to think about power levels and metahumans in a science fiction setting. And a lot of the Marvel and DC shows going on right now, and the films, put the heroes arriving in the roughly contemporary era. And DC and Marvel has been doing this for decades. They move them up so they're always in the current era. And when their things start getting a little too stretched out, and people are asking, well, why isn't Batman getting too old to do this? Or why isn't Spider-Man finding out of college and things like that? They just reboot it and they move it up again. When do the metas show up in a campaign? Okay, now if they're just the contemporaries, then they've been around for 5 or 10 years, and then it's not difficult to kind of move them into the real world because they haven't had that big effect yet. The ripples haven't gone that far. But if you move them back, say when the golden era started, so they actually arrive back in the 30s, the ripples are much larger. Take a look at J.R.R. Martin's Wildcard series for an example of that. When the heroes show up at the end of World War II, and they have significant ripples through time, all the way up to what was the end of the present when the last story was read. I'm not sure I read all of them, but I read a lot of them. And I've got the supplements for both GURPS and Mutants and Mastermind 3. Is it 2 or 3? I'm not sure. Excellent supplements. The Mutant Mastermind is actually better than the GURPS one because Martin himself actually worked with the Mutants and Mastermind folks. And what happens if the metas are even earlier? So the heroes of the classical era, the Greek and the Egyptian and the Norse heroes, the demigods, what if they're the first metas? And maybe what if they are actually demi-humans, demigods, like godlike, or Scion? You know, they're actually fueled by divine power. Then you have huge effects on the present. Nothing that we know now would exist. The world would be a completely different entity. You also have to decide what power level things are at. So say if you want to enter them in the golden era, cool, you can enter them in the golden era. But are they the Shadow and Spider and Doc Savage power levels? And Doc Savage is moving into the Luke Cage zone, but not nearly that tough. He's makes me kind of think more like 3D Man, who's like 3 times the power of a human, but not as powerful as Luke Cage is. He's also a genius, so it works out. He's got other abilities that Luke Cage doesn't. Luke Cage is not a genius. Or do you want to move the power levels up to the conventional that was the actual golden era when you had Superman and the early Flash and things like that, and the early supervillains? And I can't remember when when Marvel was a latecomer to this show. I can't remember when they were first heroes. Were the first heroes in the Marvel universe in the 50s? I can't remember. But you know, you could set it then, so it's a little bit later. But when you set it, has a greater impact on the present. And I've seen very few comics or TV shows or films that really integrate that. There was it Transmetropolitan was a comic that really showed what happened when when the world was completely saturated with metas. It completely changed everything. There was in the area where the metas lived was unrecognizable for the most part to our world, for good reason. And that, in many ways, is what happened to Martin's wildcard cities. It became very different. You know, instead of a lot of minorities being thrown into the meat grinder of Vietnam, it was the jokers. It was the less perfect metas of that world. The McCarthy era was all about the subversive metas and the danger they posed to society. So it was very different, but it echoed our world. The AIDS crisis hit the metas differently than it hit the rest of us, but it still hit them. And all of these things are kind of bouncing around in my skull. There wasn't a specific plot line I'd come up with this. There wasn't a specific structure. It was more than some just like free-floating ideas. But when you set your early start point, what power levels do you set, and are they true metas, or are they more pulpy? You could have just masked adventurers like they had in Watchmen until Dr. Manhattan shows up, but all the other ones were just normal people in costumes and using fancy gadgets and particularly bright individuals. In the case of Asmodeus, he was essentially Batman, but just more capitalist aimed and willing to do the things that he felt he had to do to save the world. He wasn't concerned with collateral damage, let's put it that way. He was a little more pragmatic, if a little more brutal. Okay, a lot more brutal. He was willing to kill millions to save billions. Which you can kind of see. It's the classic railroad car scenario, trolley car scenario, but writ large. And I still think it's a really tough decision to make, but he was willing to make it. So where do you set these things? I like the idea of actual metas. I like a power level that's fairly high, so pretty much what the comics are now, or were in the Golden Age. And while setting the start point in the Golden Age is easy, doing it in the contemporary time is easier. Now, the last time I used supers, I did that. It was the H1N1, it was the H1N1 virus. That the mutated next generation of that virus was what triggered the metas, and it was people who survived it, who got it and didn't die, found themselves changed, and the government was trying to hunt them down, and the campaign didn't go far enough to figure out what the government was going to do about this. And in many cases, they couldn't do anything. They could not contain these people. They were too powerful. But the favorite NPC I'd thrown in there was a guy who was a major Star Wars fan, and when he became infected with the virus and survived, he became a Wookiee forever. At first, people thought he was a Bigfoot, which, you know, he kind of looks like one. But that was just kind of a fun idea. But that, again, I said it in the now because that's really easy. That's the simplest way to do it because almost nothing changes. It just works from that point forward. But I got to tell you, I'm intrigued by the classical era idea. But that is so much work. I mean, just unbelievable amounts of work to make that feel real. Because the world is going to be nothing like we have now. English may never have developed. You know, different peoples will have settled in Europe. Different cultures would have evolved, completely different cultures. Perchance the cultures of the indigenous peoples of other areas of the world are able to resist colonization because they have metas of their own. As the metas pop up, maybe they start in Greece and it radiates out from there. That's ground zero. So it just moves out from there. Or maybe it happens all at once. Something happens and all of a sudden the world is awakened and the metas arrive. The demigods are no longer verbal myths, but now they walk the earth and fly through the sky. And they are real. And the world is nothing like what we have now. So tell me, what do you like? And would you be willing to go through the effort to start in the classical era and show what the world is now? And do you know of any fictional resources that have done that or something similar to that, really reached back and then played out the ramifications logically? Not just the contemporary and say, oh no, they're like vampires have always been here, like Masquerade, which is bull crap, or the Nina Blake books where they had one vampire that was an Australopithecine. He'd been around for 2 million years, and somehow it was just our world with supernatural beings, which made, again, no frigging sense. But has anyone out there done it right? Really dug in there and done the hard work to make the world different, but still understandable and believable by the people reading it and playing it now? So let's talk about power levels and start points and metahumans, because this kind of stuff fascinates me.